Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bill Bronchick, and welcome to Webinar Wednesdays. Today's presentation is going to be 10 great things about lease options. As you can tell, I like lease options. In fact, I love lease options. This is how I pretty much got started in the beginning as a real estate investor. I've done it many times over the years. I continue to do them. I continue to prepare them and help clients and students through them. And it's a great tool to have in your arsenal. I should say tools, because lease options is not just one thing. There's a whole category of them, which we'll talk about during this presentation. So if you have questions as we go, please do share them in the chat window or in the Q&A portal there, and I'll be happy to answer them as we go. This will be recorded, so if you have to jump out early for any reason, such as you are bleeding, sick, or you have to go to your child's wedding, I'll give you a pass. Otherwise, stick around because you're going to learn a lot of great information. So get a pen and paper and get ready to get blown away with the information you're going to learn from this. So before we get started, I wanted to quote you something from one of my favorite actors, Will Smith, who said, "Don't rely on talent. Instead, develop skills." Some people think that they have innate talent for business, and that's great, but you're not going to get good at these techniques unless you develop skills. Even if you have no talent, that's fine too. Develop skills. So what separates people who are successful from unsuccessful in real estate is not necessarily who's smarter or who starts with more money or starts with more experience. It's those who develop the skills necessary to be successful as a real estate investor. And these skills, of course, are going to be very important. Now, skills require education, getting to learn the techniques that I'm going to be talking about. And there's different types of education. Of course, there's formal education, which many of us who have gone to college or maybe got their master's, or like me, got their law degree. And I've got 7 years of formal education. Didn't teach me the first thing I needed to know about how to make money. In fact, they didn't even teach me in law school how to be a successful lawyer or run a law practice. It was just all legal theory and researching and making a case. I never learned, and you probably didn't either, even in business school, how to really run a profitable business, how to invest, how to balance a checkbook, for crying out loud. In order to do that, you need specialized knowledge, and that's how you develop your skills. Napoleon Hill wrote about this in his book, Think and Grow Rich, in 1938. And by the way, if you have not read this book, please email me, bill@bronchick.com, and I'd be happy to give you a free copy of this in PDF. Napoleon Hill writes in his book, there are two kinds of knowledge. One is general, the other is specialized. General knowledge, no matter how great in quantity, varieties may be, is but little use in the accumulation of money. I know that for sure. The person who stops studying merely because he has finished school is forever hopelessly doomed to mediocrity, no matter what may be his calling. The way of success is the way of continuous pursuit of knowledge, not just any knowledge, specialized knowledge. Especially if you're going to be in real estate, general knowledge like you would take for a broker's exam, or you'd get a master's degree in, or take a real estate class in general, or maybe even read a book or two. That general knowledge is only going to get you so far. If you want to get good at something, you've got to really focus on putting in the hours to learn, to do research, and to get out and make offers and talk to sellers and buyers. So let's start with the very basics. What is a lease option? A lease option, sometimes called a rent-to-own, sometimes called a lease purchase, is all pretty much the same thing. They're called by different marketing pet names, but a lease with option, a rent-to-own, it's all the same thing. We have a lease agreement, which is a contract, plus an option to purchase agreement gives you a lease with option agreement. Now, sometimes those agreements are combined into one. Sometimes they are separated. We'll get to why in a little bit. A lease agreement is a right to possess a property. Now, that right may not mean that you're going to possess it. So, for example, you can have a lease where you're going to live in it as a resident, or you can have what's called a master lease, where you can sublet it and you have the permission to do so to other tenants, residential or commercial. It's used in a variety of circumstances. I had a client who leased a commercial warehouse for $6,000 or $7,000 a month and then sublet it to marijuana growers. and pocketed about $6,500 a month net from the sublease to the master lease. So, you don't have to live in a property in order to have profit. You don't have to own a property in order to make profit. An option to purchase is what is known in the business as a unilateral, one-way agreement. A typical agreement to purchase real estate is bilateral. Seller agrees to sell, promises to sell. Buyer agrees, promises to buy. If either one fails to perform, then they're in breach of the agreement. An option is different. An option is a one-way agreement. The seller promises to sell. The buyer may or may not exercise his option to purchase. So the buyer has the right but not the obligation. The seller has the obligation. You can buy or you could choose not to buy. And as a buyer, you're not in breach if you don't buy. The seller can't force you to buy or sue you for damages if you don't what's called exercise that option and purchase the property. Now, a lease agreement is an interest in real estate. If for those of you who wonder, what's the difference between a lease and an option? A lease is an interest in real estate. A possessory right is an interest in real estate. It's also a contract because it's written. Now, you can have an oral lease, and oral leases in most states are valid up to a year. Beyond that are not enforceable. So you can have a non-written lease agreement or a month-to-month oral agreement, but typically rental agreements are in writing. An option to purchase is a personal property right. It is not a real estate right. Until that option is exercised and the property is closed, the buyer has no equitable interest in the property. This is important to understand because it's different from having a purchase contract, which does give you an equitable interest in the property. Now, that may be splitting hairs here, but a lease plus a purchase agreement versus a lease plus an option agreement are technically two different things, although we use the words lease purchase and lease option interchangeably. An option agreement, let's say you put up some sort of option fee for the right to buy, like you would do on a stock if you have a put or a call. So if you put, let's say, $100 to the seller for the right to buy the property at an agreed upon price for a year, if you don't exercise the option, you're not in breach, but you'll lose your option fee, your $100. If you had a bilateral purchase agreement and you put up $100 earnest money and didn't close, you'd be in breach as the buyer. However, if that bilateral purchase agreement has what's called a liquidated damages provision, that would say in the event of buyer's default on the contract, the seller's sole and only remedy is to keep the buyer's earnest money. In practice, it's really the same thing. There's no difference in practice. But legally speaking, a lease with a purchase agreement does give you an equitable interest in the property. A lease with an option does not. Why is that important? Not really for most intents and purposes. But sometimes, depending on who you're dealing with and how you're dealing with, trying to list it on the MLS without an equitable interest, for example, which you wouldn't do in a lease option anyway in most cases, if you were the buyer on the lease option, coming across a problem with the real estate commission saying you're not acting in a way that wouldn't require a license. So what you're doing is you're selling real estate, and the argument against that is, well, I could sell real estate I own, i.e. have an equitable interest in, whereas an option, you're just dealing in options. And there's 3 or 4 states, including Colorado and Ohio, that have language that say dealing in options requires a license, okay? Dealing in options. So we'll come back to that. That's just a technical splitting hairs thing, but it's not really something to get hung up over, but we'll come back to that in a little bit. So what is a lease? A lease is a right of possession. It's also a contract. It's a conveyance of an interest in real estate. It is assignable, or you could sublet. So if the brokerage statute says you need a license to lease property you don't own, having a right of possession is an interest in real estate, which allows you to sell that, sublet it, assign it. So that would get you around the brokerage statute on the lease portion. You can also create cash flow without actually owning it by subletting the property at a higher price of lease that you're paying the owner. An option is a unilateral contract. We have the optionor, that's the person who gives, and then that's the seller. And the optionee receives the option, that'd be the buyer. So seller/landlord, buyer/tenant. In law, generally, ors are the givers and es are the receivers. So the seller gives an option to you. He's the optionor, and the optionee would be the receiver of that option, i.e. the tenant/buyer. It's excellent for controlling property, and this is a really good thing. I'll tell you a quick story of a famous option deal. William Zeckendorf, who was a famous developer in the 30s and 40s in New York City, and many of you may have heard that name because a lot of major cities have Zeckendorf buildings downtown. He was a famous developer who put together the United Nations deal. It was rumored that the United Nations was looking for a home, and they were looking at Paris and New York and San Francisco. When Zeckendorf got word that New York was highly considered, he went and took options on property in Sheepshead Bay, Manhattan, on the water, which is on the middle to upper east side of Manhattan. They were slaughterhouses, didn't really, the value of the land wasn't really much there, but he got quietly bought up options on these pieces of land. Then when the deal was being negotiated, he went to the governor, and then Rockefeller funded it, and then the UN people were there, and he pulled out a map, and he took a marker, and he marked across a circle in the area that he controlled by option. He says, I have all this, what will you give me? And he got millions of dollars for his option that he paid only a few $1,000s for. A very famous story. Sadly, Zeckendorf died broke because he developed or tried to develop and failed a very famous place in LA called Century City, which went bust. Someone else took it over and finished it. Now it's a very famous part of Los Angeles, but that's the story of Zeckendorf and how he used options to control land. Now, the great thing about that is he paid several thousand for the options. What if the deal couldn't be made? Well, he wasn't committed to pay $1 million for the land. He only committed for the option money. And the same thing with you. If you lease a property with an option to buy, and let's say it's for a 3-year lease, if the property goes down in value, you just walk away, and all you've lost is your option money. As opposed to buying it and putting a 30-year loan on it, then you're stuck for 30 years. You have to wait for the market to cycle around again. So it's a good hedge against inflation or deflation. So let's talk about the 10 benefits. Number 1, when selling on a lease with option, now you're the owner of the property, you get a higher price than if you sold it for cash. Why? Terms always do better than cash. There's a lot more people who would like to do a rent-to-own or lease with option than who can qualify for a loan. So there's more buyers. More buyers means more demand means higher price. Also a faster sale. When I say sale, I don't mean the closing of it. I mean the transaction of lease with option. You can get that done in a matter of weeks, not in a matter of months, because there's no loan at this point. It's just a lease with option to purchase. You could find a tenant/buyer to go in the property relatively quickly. No realtor fee. This is a big one. No realtor fee. So no 6%. If you put an ad out in Craigslist and a couple of different websites and put signs around the property and in the neighborhood, rent to own, lease with option to buy, you will get all the tenant/buyers you'll ever need. And you could skip a realtor fee. Now, remember, you don't get your money out of the property until it sells, maybe a year or two later when the tenant exercises his option to buy, but you also don't pay a realtor fee, which is 6%, on a property that you bought and maybe overpaid for. It could be a good thing. You also get a better quality tenant. A regular tenant is expecting you to fix everything. A rent-to-own tenant, they have to do some of the minor repairs. Now, you can't make a tenant do all the repairs. The warranty of habitability, which is the same pretty much in all 50 states, says that a landlord is responsible for making the property habitable. What does that mean? Well, slightly different interpretation by courts and states, but generally it means you got to provide hot water, heat, free from elements. If it's the South, air conditioning in the summertime, running water, electric, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? But you could have a clause in the rent-to-own contract that says that, if a screen door breaks or a non-emergency or non-habitability item is broken, the tenant is responsible for it, because after all, they may become the owner of this property in the future. So you can make that pitch that they'd be responsible for the minor repairs. You can use it, benefit number 3, sorry, I skipped ahead here. Benefit number 3, you could save a bad fix and flip project. So let's say you bought a property intending to fix it and flip it retail. You paid too much. Your repairs went over budget. Now you're into the property for too much. And if you sold it on the market, maybe you'd break even or even lose money with the realtor fee. Instead of doing that, refinance the property. If you have a hard money loan, for example, get yourself you don't even need a 30-year fix. You can get a 5/1 adjustable rate mortgage. I mean, it's fixed for 5 years, lower interest rate, and then sell it on a rent-to-own with no realtor. And you can mark up the price. So if you marked up the price 5% and you skip the 6% realtor fee, that's 11% margin that wasn't there anymore. In the meantime, you've got income coming in to cover your mortgage payment, maybe even a little profit every month. And in the future, when you sell it, let's say it's after 12 months, first of all, it's a long-term capital gain, which is less tax than buying, fixing, and flipping within a year, which is a ordinary gain. So, this is a great way to save a bad fix and flip project. Also, you may be able to ride appreciation. So the price you're fixing is not only a premium because you're offering terms, but if the property is appreciating 5 to 6% a year, you could sell it to the tenant at next year's price and they'll gladly pay it. Number 4, also when selling on a lease option, a long-term capital gain treatment. So if you structure your rent-to-own with your tenant that they cannot exercise the option to buy until you've owned the property for 12 months, maybe not 12 months from the inception of the lease option, but 12 months from when you acquired the property, let's say it was a fix and flip converted to a rent-to-own, then you can get long-term capital gain treatment, which caps out at 20% tax. It also will qualify for a 1031 exchange. Now, if you buy a property, fix it up, and a few months later want to sell it, that doesn't qualify for an exchange, because in order to qualify for a 1031 exchange, the property must have been held for productive use. What does that mean? Well, generally it means renting it. So if you had a property that was a rent-to-own instead of a fix and flip, so you fix it and then sell it on a rent-to-own, and the tenant exercises the option down the road, let's say a year or two later, then you can exchange the proceeds out of that into another property and defer paying capital gains tax and recapture of depreciation. Now, how long do you have to hold it? A lot of people are under the mistaken impression that you need to hold it a year, and that's not true. There's nothing in the Internal Revenue Code 1031 section that says you have to hold it for a year. You just have to hold it for productive use, but a lot of CPAs will say, don't let them exercise until a year and a day. That way it shows up as a rental on 2 tax returns, 2 years tax returns, and it's not a flag for an audit. But there really is. If they exercise in 9 months, that still qualifies. Number 5, cash flow. Nice cash flow on the property. So you have rent coming in. You can get option money up front from the tenant. Non-refundable. So instead of first, last, and security, what you take is first and option money. Now, the option money is like an earnest money deposit. We call it option money. You can call it earnest money. It's the same thing. They put up money up front, and usually it's between 2 to 5% of the purchase price, depending on the value of the house. On a $300,000 house, that could be 9 or 10 grand. So let's say you get 10 grand up front plus first month's rent. No security deposit required, which is nice, and it's non-refundable. So if the tenant buys from you, we knock the 10 grand off the price when they exercise. If they don't purchase the property, or they just default and you evict them, they lose their $10,000 and you get to keep it. So you get to keep it either way, so you don't have to escrow it. You could spend it as soon as you get it. Nice about it, this even further, is option money is deferred tax liability. If in 2020 you take $10,000 option money and the tenant exercises their option in 2022, you're not paying tax on that money until April of 2023, because option money is not considered income. It's sort of like an open transaction that hasn't been completed yet. So until the tenant either exercises, abandons, or defaults, that money is not taxable until that tax year where that event happens. And that you can find that under section 1234 of the tax code if you don't believe it. Look it up. Option money, not taxable until the tax year it is exercised, expires, or is in default. So, and again, no security deposit escrow. In most states, you have to escrow security deposit money in a bank account, give tenant notice of it, and so on and so forth. Maybe even give them interest that you're getting from the bank. And you have to reconcile it at the end when they leave if they don't exercise it. We're not doing that. We're not collecting earnest money. We don't need to. We're getting 10 G's. What do you need an earnest? What do you need a security deposit for? You got 10 grand. All right. If they destroy the place, you had 10 grand. You know, you have plenty of money to deal with it. It's better than having 2 grand. Now let's look at the next ones when buying on a lease with option. Number 6, you get to try before you buy. So let's say you're in the market for a home, you just moved to a new town, you just got a new job, and you want to try before you buy. See if you like the neighborhood. You don't want to commit to a property. So a lease with option is a way to do that. You're not committed to purchase. Again, you have the option to do so. And if you don't exercise your option to purchase, you can always sell the option to someone else who wants to exercise the option. So you could sell or assign your option to purchase if you choose not to live there. Number 7, when buying, you get a fixed price in a rising market. Now, when we're selling, we're going to sell at next year's price, plus a premium for the terms. When we're buying, we're trying to get today's price, maybe even below today's price, as best we can, and fixed for as long as we can. You know, maybe 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, because in an appreciating market, if your option price is at 300 and in 3 years it's worth 350, you've got $50,000 in equity there. Okay, so that's definitely a value for you as a buyer. It's a hedge against the market crash, as we talked about. If the property goes down in value, you just keep renting. That's it. You keep renting, you don't buy it. Number 8, you can get, when you're buying, a credit of part of your rent towards the purchase price of the property. So let's say you're paying $2 grand a month in rent. You can negotiate with the seller if he has equity. If he doesn't have equity, that's not going to work. But if, let's say, he owes $250 and it's worth $300 now, and you agreed on, let's say, $275 as a price, okay, fixed for 5 years in an appreciating market, that's not bad. You could negotiate in your agreement that for every $2,000 a month you pay, you get 20% or $400 credited towards the purchase when you buy. If you don't buy, you don't get that. But if you buy, after a year, 12 times 400 is $4,800. After 2 years, it's $9,600. Knocked off the $275 price when you buy, if you buy. If you don't buy, you lose that. Allows you to build equity in the deal. So again, if you choose not to buy or you're unable to buy, let's say you live in the property for 2 or 3 years and you rack up $50,000 in appreciation and $15,000 in rent credits. That's $65,000 in equity in the deal, okay? Now, if you exercise your option and get a loan, that's great. But if you can't, can you sell that $65,000 in equity in your option to someone else for $40,000? Sure you could. And then now all the rent that you've paid for 3 years, 36 months times 2,000. What's 36 months times 2,000? That's $7,200, and you got $40,000 back. You more than paid for the cost of living there. Hope I did that math right. Was that right? $2,000 a month times 12 is $24,000. Sorry, $72,000. I did that wrong. $72,000, and you got $40,000 back by selling your option. It only cost you $32 grand to live there for 3 years. which averages out to half the rent. Not bad, not bad. Number 9, when buying on a lease option, you could do repairs and improvements to build equity as well. You could take an old house and fix it up, paint it, carpet it, change the use, add bedrooms, add a garage. Now, these are risky things if you don't have good paperwork, because what you don't want to do is do all this work and then the seller decides, well, screw you, I'm not giving you the property. He'd be obligated and you can sue him, but as a practical matter, that's tricky, sticky, and expensive. So you want to make sure you have a lawyer or have really good forms to set up this transaction. It's easy in theory, but the devil, as they say, is in the details of things that can go wrong. So let's say you have an option on a property. You can do repairs and improvements to improve the equity in the property and build sweat equity by doing painting and, maybe adding a garage or, finishing out a basement and so forth. And finally, number 10, it's easier to negotiate with the seller than a cash deal. When you're dealing with a motivated seller who's somewhat motivated but not desperate, if they owe $275 on a property worth $300, it's pretty easy to say to the seller, listen, I'll lease it for your payment, which is, let's say it's $1,800 a month, okay? And market rent is $2,500 or $2,200. So that'd be good if you could pay $1,800 versus $2,200 a month and live in it. Have an option at $275 when it's worth $300 is not a super steal in equity, but if it's in an appreciating neighborhood, after 3 or 4 years, it could be worth $350, and you can exercise your option for $275. You're building equity pretty darn fast. However, you can't negotiate rent credits there, because if they owe $275, there's no room. There's no room to do that. However, if you can buy it after 3 years, and let's say after 3 years of living there, the market's gone down, the property's only worth $250. Thanks. I enjoyed it. I leased a house for $1,800 that should have rented for $2,200. I enjoyed it. I had the option to buy. I'm choosing not to buy, and I'm walking away. How bad could that be? You don't need an attorney or broker necessarily. It's not a bad idea to have an attorney prepare a set of forms or review a set of forms that you've prepared in your local market to make sure it's appropriate for the way you were doing your deals, because everybody does them a little bit differently and tweaks, what I say, but you shouldn't. You should follow it exactly how I tell you, and don't stray from the core. Okay, that's how you get yourself in trouble. But everybody has their little nuance of how they do it. Just be careful that you review those nuances with an attorney. But generally speaking, people enter into lease transactions without brokers or attorneys. So a seller is much more inclined to do a lease option without an attorney or broker than, let's say, a cash sale, an owner carry, a subject to, or something like that. It's less money down if you're the buyer. If you're a buyer on a property and let's say it's an expensive property, let's say $1 million property that you can, $1 million property you can lease for probably $5,000 a month, where a mortgage payment might be $6,000, okay, or $4,000 a month, where a mortgage payment might be $5,500 with principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Because remember, as the tenant, you're not paying taxes and insurance. The owner is. You're just paying lease payments. So if the seller bought it a number of years ago based on a $600,000 mortgage, and his payment is $4,000 a month, and you can rent it for $4,000, and market rent is $5,000, and a mortgage, if you were going to buy it, would be $5,000 a month. So you're saving $1,000 a month. But instead of having to put 20% down on a big mortgage like that, maybe you only put 3% down with a seller. And routinely, I've done this over and over, 90% of the time, with just first and last, or first and nothing. That's it. And if you can negotiate that with a motivated seller, of maybe first in security or first and last, that's a heck of a lot less to risk. If the market goes up, you exercise your option or you sell your option. If the market goes down, whatever. You don't exercise your option. Okay. Also potentially favorable rent, as we talked about. If the seller, let's go back to our $300,000 example. Let's say they owe $200,000 and you want to pay $220,000. They're going, no way, I'm not going to sell it for $220,000. That's too low. They might sell it for $275,000, but they're not selling it for $220,000. Now, $275,000 is too much to pay for cash on a house worth $300,000, but on a lease with option, if their payment was $1,200 a month on their mortgage, on their $200,000 mortgage, and you could lease it for $1,200 a month and market rent was $2,000, that'd be really, really good, right? That'd be really, really good. And if you didn't want to live there, you could sublet it to somebody else at market rent and catch the spread on what we call a sandwich lease option, which I'll talk about in just a moment. All right, so here's the bonus content. 7 ways to use a lease with option to purchase. Here we go. And by the way, in my program, my lease option program, I have more than 7, but here's 7 ways you can do it. And there's a lot of variations. 1, the principal residence purchase, which we've been talking about in the last 4 or 5 bullet points. If you're looking in the market to buy a house, you can't qualify now, you're not sure if you want to buy now, you need to fix credit issues, you filed a bankruptcy a year and a half ago, you just started a new business or job and you need a couple years on the job or business, great way to do it as a principal residence. You can do it as a sale to a tenant, as we talked about in the first 5 or 6 bullet points. You own the house, you bought it and rented for a while. Now you can do a rent to own, or you bought it with the intent to flip it and you're into it for too much. Sell it to a tenant buyer on a rent to own agreement. And by the way, rent to own, lease purchase. When I'm talking to an owner, I like to use the expression lease purchase. Why? The reason is because it sounds more committal. What the seller wants is this property to sell, not rent. When I'm dealing with a tenant, I don't use lease purchase. I go rent to own, because most tenants are familiar with that expression. They have those stores where you can get a TV rent to own, so they know that vernacular. Lease with option or lease purchase is not very commonly known to most would-be tenant buyers in your property. So a sale to a tenant, that's another way. The Juncker lease option. The Juncker lease option. This is where you have a property, like maybe it's a rental, and the tenant just trashed it. I've had many of these. You put it up as follows. Instead of getting option money down, what you do is you make them work for the option money. So you put an ad out that says something like this. I put a sign on the property. It says, rent to own. 0 down, the letter U, dash FIX. So rent, the number 2, own, $0 down, like a dollar sign, 0 down, U/fix. You put that sign in front of the property and in the neighborhood with your phone number. Oh my God, you better be prepared for the onslaught of calls from that sign, because it will bombard you. First of all, everybody thinks they're a handyman. A lot of people with skills, or think they have skills, or hands-on work, but don't have the money to put down. So you're going to get an onslaught. You're going to get literally dozens, if not hundreds of calls. And you're going to have to screen through them and find the one that really is qualified to do the work. A couple of tips. Number 1, don't let them move in until they do the work. Don't say you can move in now and then do the work over the next year. I can tell you from experience that rarely happens. So let them do the work, give them 2 or 3 weeks. Once they've done it, you inspect it, you approve it, and then you write up the rent-to-own agreement, giving them credit for that work as their option money. Number 2, pick someone who's qualified in the trades. Just because some guy's a drywaller doesn't mean he knows how to do electric. Maybe he's got a buddy who can do it for him cheap, but don't let them do their own work. Make sure they're qualified to do the work, especially and particularly if they have to pull permits. Number 4, one of my favorites, the sandwich lease option. Lease it from an owner on a master lease with an option to buy. Sublet to a tenant, give them an option to buy from you. Okay, so you're leasing it for under market rent, subletting it for market rent, catching a spread on the rents. Number 2, you give the seller little, if anything, down, but you collect option money from your subtenant. Okay, that's your second profit. Your third profit is going to be the difference in your option to buy and the option you give to your subtenant. So we're combining techniques here, a purchase lease option and a sale lease option. So you buy on a lease purchase, sell on a rent to own, so to speak, in the vernacular. You catch a spread on the monthly rent. You get non-refundable money up front from your tenant. And then when the tenant's ready to buy, you exercise your option from the owner and flip it in a back-to-back closing to the tenant. and you get a nice little chunk of money at the back end there too. The lease option assignment. So let's say you find a seller with a really nice property, really good condition, very new, doesn't need anything, maybe just a carpet cleaning in a nice neighborhood, $400,000 or $500,000 house. That may not be a nice neighborhood if you live in California, but in most parts of the country, 400 or 500 is a decent house. Okay, so you can lease it from the owner with an option to buy, but there's not a lot in there. Meaning, the mortgage payment of the seller is $2,200 and the market rent is $2,300. It doesn't make sense to sandwich it because you're only going to catch 100 months on the spread. It's too risky. Let's say the option to buy is at $375 or $475 and the property is only worth $500. There's not a lot here, okay? So instead of doing a sandwich, you just advertise it as a deal that you're going to assign, and you assign it to another owner occupant who steps in your shoes and does the deal directly with the owner on the close, and you just get $5,000 or $10,000, or maybe $5 or $10 now and $5 or $10 later when they exercise the option. The rehab lease option. This is one of my favorites too. So let's say you look at a property, it's free and clear, and it's uninhabitable as is. It's a real piece of junk. Now you could go in there if there's enough room and you buy it cheap enough and fix it up and sell it, and you'd probably have to borrow hard money to do that. And hard money is going to cost you about a third of your profit. So on a $300,000 house, it could be 15 grand worth of money for hard money. So you can go to the seller and say, well, I can pay you cash X, which would involve you getting hard money, or I could pay you X plus 15,000 if you'll do the following. Lease it to me for 6 months for $1 a month. Why $1 a month? It's uninhabitable. You just want possession, the right to get in there and fix it up. You get an option to buy for X plus 15, right? You do the work, and then you exercise your option and then sell the property retail, or you exercise the option, put a regular mortgage note and then sell it on a lease with option, whatever. But it's a way of doing it without hard money. $1 a month is better than $2,000 a month, which might cost you in hard money. And finally, what I call the Texas lease option. Now, the sad news for those of you who are watching, if you're from Texas, you can't sell on a lease with option. You can buy on a lease with option. You can't sell on a lease with option to an owner occupant and give them an option to buy. They just made the rules so complex, it's effectively banned, okay? But what you can do is this. You can do a sandwich as follows. Lease it from the owner with an option to buy. Sublet it to the tenant, no option to buy. That's fine. Catch a monthly spread on the rent. In an appreciating market, 2 or 3 years go by, third tenant's lease is up after 3 years. Now the property's worth 50 more. You go in and paint it, carpet it, clean it up, and you have an option to buy, right? So you exercise that option and turn around and flip it to somebody else, or sell your option to someone else for $50,000 or less than $50,000. Or you have an option to buy and you have a tenant in place and you sell your whole deal to another investor with a turnkey property. What you can't do is exercise your option to buy and sell it to the tenant. There's just pretty much no way around that, okay? So that's 7 different ways to use a lease option. I have many, 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 many more techniques in my home study program. Legal Wiz Guide to Lease Options, which you could find on legalwiz.com. It's an e-course. You could download a PDF manual, has online streaming videos from a live seminar, downloadable audio MP3, legal forms, spreadsheets, checklists. And these are really, really good tight forms that have been tested and tested and tested in just about every state, because I have students all over the country, okay? You get 90 days email support with the course. It's only $497. It's like giving the course away for what the value that you're getting in there, and which you'll make back about 50 times on your first deal. But you can get a code called CURE, C-U-R-E, and then go ahead and put that in when you check out, and you will get this, 60% off. 60% off 500. Oh my God, that's like $200. Yes, for real. That coupon code does expire at the end of the week, so please do so ASAP. Go to legalwiz.com/store. And by the way, that's good on all my other courses there. I have 18 different courses there on legalwiz.com/store. Or just go to legalwiz.com, click on store, and you can find all of the courses that I have available. And now I would like to take some questions. So pop them in the Q&A or in the chat there, and I'd be happy to answer a few questions before we wrap up for the day. And thanks for attending, by the way. I see we had a lot of people attend today. I appreciate you tuning in every week. I enjoy doing these live. And if you're watching the replay, make sure you get on my email list at legalwiz.com and get notice of the new and upcoming webinar Wednesdays that we do just about every Wednesday, but not every Wednesday, unless I'm out of town or something like that. Okay. I just don't feel like doing it. It's one of the great things. All right. So questions. Here we go. Kurt asks, does a lease option trigger the due on sale, due on transfer clause in California? Actually, Kurt, it triggers it everywhere. A lease with option will trigger the due on sale in a mortgage, which gives the lender the right to accelerate, but how will they know? How will they know? Title is not transferred, and there's nothing recorded on a lease with option when you are selling. Now, when you're buying, you want to record your option to protect yourself, but still the lender doesn't get notice of that. So non-issue. Never seen it happen, ever. 30 years of practicing law, done hundreds and hundreds of lease options for myself, for clients, for people all over the country, never heard of one, so the lender make a stink. Finding deals, that's the question. I guess you're asking, where would you find a lease with option? Would you look in Craigslist for the words rent to own or lease with option? The answer is no. You don't call those ads. Those are people like me advertising a lease with option. What you're looking for in Craigslist is someone who advertises for sale or lease, for rent or purchase, or an out-of-state number for lease. That's who you want to be calling and educating them as to why they want to do a lease option. Lease option deals aren't found. They are created. They're created by circumstances, and the circumstance is usually a seller who really wants to sell but can't carry the payments in the meantime, so they're renting it because they don't know what to do. That's what you're looking for. Good question, though. Are my legal forms good for California? Gilberto asks. Yes, they are. They are very good from California. Now, my option to purchase on the purchase and the sale side, fine. The only thing you have to modify in my lease is the number of days notice you have to give them before you can file an eviction. Like in California, I think it's 5. Colorado, it used to be 3, now it's 10. So the number of days that you have to give them before you can file an eviction notice, and I have a blank for that in my form. So you just got to need, I have also in the appendix of the course, a state-by-state, chart of those things as well. RA asks, is the lease option included in the creative financing course? Yes, I do cover lease options, and all the forms are included in the creative real estate financing course. That's a little more expensive, but has a lot more. It covers subject to, wraps, contracts for deed, lease options, subordinations, all kinds of other techniques. David asks, upon acceptance of a lease option, how can I protect my interest in public record? By recording either A, your option agreement, B, a memorandum of it, or C, in my course I talk about recording a performance mortgage or performance deed of trust. Now that would take me about 15 minutes to explain it. It's in the course. I explain it in detail. I don't do that every time, but if I think there's enough equity or I have enough into the deal monetarily, I'm probably going to record a lien against the property. Amy, how about New Jersey? Fine for New Jersey. This works everywhere but Texas, straight up. There's a way to do it in Texas, as I explained. Troy says, how do I refer my potential lease option buyers to a recording of this webinar? You don't want to do that, Troy, because he's going to negotiate all the things that you would want as a tenant. So don't want to do that. Find something more generic. Someone asked, how do I find, let's see, what was the question here? I'm sorry. Where's my little cursor? Is a sandwich lease option similar to a master lease option? Yes, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Someone writes, Denver market pretty tough to find motivated sellers. I don't concur. There are people with problems in every market, no matter how good the market is in favor of the seller. You will find, if you look, there are plenty of people willing to do this. And finally, one last question here. What do I do if I have questions on a lease option deal? You can email me. You get 90 days support, and 90 days you should be able to find yourself a potential deal. I'll be happy to review it with you if you email me and walk you through what forms and things you need to do. But it's all in the course. It's all in the course. All right, everybody, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it. I enjoyed this event. You can watch the replay. Will be posted on legalwiz.com. Click on webinars, and you will see the replay there. And I will probably send out an email notifying everyone of the link as well. But if you're watching on the replay, remember there's only a limited time to get that super discounted price with that code. So make sure you do it now. Thanks everyone for joining, and have a great week.